This video features an audio overview generated by Google Notebook LM based on Tsushin 2023-20, a post Quiet Beef, or Moku-Gyuu, in Japanese, originally published on May 22, 2023. As part of my Tsushin series on Substack. Tsushin, for QB Newsletter, in English, was a newsletter serving as a weekly digest and collection of musings based on the text I had scattered across social media. However, after a recurrence of panic disorder led to medication-based treatment, I experienced side effects such as a brain too calm sensation, drowsiness, and gastrointestinal issues. These factors made it impossible to maintain a regular weekly schedule, so I put the publication on hiatus. What was happening in the world, in the US, and in Japan back in May 2023? It was only a short time ago, but do we modern people, constantly swept up in a massive tsunami of information, actually remember? The present is a product of the past, reflecting on how those events from back then connect to this situation we face today might just be a worthwhile way to spend some time.
These topics that Moku-Gyuu was concerned about, indignant over, or predicting, it may be very meaningful to listen while considering how they stand now in the present moment as you listen to this podcast.
Exactly. We tend to memorize history from textbooks for tests, but we often quickly forget the major, truly historic events we actually lived through in the near past.
Right. So what happens when you catch the absolute truth, drag it back to society, and then realize that society just doesn't actually want it?
Yeah, they just completely reject it.
Exactly. So today we're doing a deep dive into the mind of an author who goes by the pen name Quiet Beef.
Quiet Beef.
Yeah, and we're looking at this really dense, highly opinionated, and fiercely political blog post of his titled Tsushin.
And that was published on May 22, 2023.
Yes, May 22, 2023. And in his writing, he refers to himself as Moku-Gyuu. It's pronounced Moku-Gyuu.
Got it.
Our mission for you today is to explore his, well, deeply cynical worldview. Specifically, his battle against what he calls the narrative world, or narrative sekai.
Narrative sekai, right.
We're going to examine his take on global politics, Japanese media scandals, and how he uses his own neurodivergent perspective to decode what he sees as fundamental flaws in human society.
But before we step into his framework, we need to make something very clear to you listening. We are simply impartial guides to this material.
Right. Very important to state.
We are not taking sides or endorsing any of the political viewpoints, left-wing or right-wing, presented in Moku-Gyuu's writing. Our goal is strictly to convey the ideas contained in the original source material so you can understand his perspective.
Yeah, exactly. With that foundation laid, the central engine of his whole argument operates on this concept he calls kyozetsu.
Which translates to rejection, right?
Rejection, yeah. He posits that human beings actively reject undeniable truths just to protect their own psychological comfort.
Right. They choose to live in that obedient narrative world because actual reality is just, well, it's become too structurally painful to look at.
So we have to look at the mechanics of why that happens. Moku-Gyuu anchors this in cognitive dissonance.
Right. And cognitive dissonance isn't just like a mild disagreement.
No, it's actual psychological distress. It happens when you hold a core belief about how the world works, and then you're confronted with undeniable evidence that contradicts it.
The brain experiences literal friction.
Exactly. And to relieve that pain, your brain will almost always discard the new evidence rather than shatter its whole worldview.
So to illustrate this, he points directly at American politics, specifically the Durham Report.
Yeah, in his analysis, the Durham Report was the definitive proof that the entire Trump-Russia collusion narrative was a hoax.
He actually goes as far as calling it a treasonous conspiracy.
Right, strong words. And he expected this revelation to just fundamentally alter public consciousness. But instead, he watched with intense frustration as the mainstream media and the public mostly just dismissed it as another right-wing conspiracy theory.
But to him, that dismissal isn't a glitch in the system. It's the system working exactly as intended.
Wait, how so?
Well, if the public accepted the Durham Report, they'd have to confront this terrifying reality that the institutions they trust, the intelligence community, legacy media, the political establishment, that they orchestrated a massive deception.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that would trigger unbearable cognitive dissonance.
Exactly. So the psychological defense mechanism kicks in, and they just cling desperately to the familiar narrative.
And he builds on this by looking at the Biden administration, too. He highlights the testimony of an IRS whistleblower who claimed the entire investigative team looking into Hunter Biden was just abruptly dismantled.
Yeah, removed entirely.
Moku-Gyuu connects this to a darker trend of institutional self-preservation. He brings up a Department of Homeland Security initiative that was designed to teach the public how to spot radical conservatives as potential domestic terrorists.
And we really need to unpack that DHS initiative through his lens, because he doesn't see this as a national security measure at all.
Right, he views it as the ultimate weaponization of a government against its own citizens.
Yeah, by officially labeling a specific political faction as a domestic threat, the government gives the public a really comfortable sanctions narrative.
It gives them a bad guy.
Exactly, an easily identifiable bad guy, which totally relieves the psychological pain of having to ask, is the establishment itself corrupt?
Right, it turns ordinary citizens into voluntary enforcers of the narrative world.
Yeah, and to capture just how exhausting it is to fight this, he uses an incredible analogy.
Oh, I love this part. He compares the modern pursuit of truth to Ernest Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea.
It's perfect.
It really is. He views fighting for the truth as this grand, almost futile physical struggle against the elements. You go out into the deep water, you fight the current, and against all odds, you finally catch the truth.
That's the giant marlin.
The marlin, right. But the tragedy is the journey back to shore. By the time you drag this massive truth back to the public, the institutions, the bureaucrats, the media, they act as the sharks.
They swarm the boat.
They swarm it, they bite and tear at reality, and they eat all the meat off the bone. So by the time you arrive at the dock to present your catch, all that's left is a stripped-down skeleton.
And tying that back to cognitive dissonance, Moku-Gyuu argues the public actually prefers the skeleton.
Really? Why?
Because looking at the raw meat of the truth, the undeniable reality of systemic corruption, it would shatter their worldview. In a twisted way, the media and institutions are doing the public a favor by devouring the truth.
Wow.
They strip away the reality so the masses can stay safely insulated in their narrative world, just admiring this harmless skeleton.
That is such a vivid picture.
Yeah.
But if these huge institutions manipulate truth so effectively in America, we have to look at how this operates in Japan, too. Moku-Gyuu takes this exact framework and applies it to institutional rot in Japan.
He sees the identical disease, right? Just manifesting with different cultural symptoms.
Yeah. He points his lens right at the massive Johnny Kitagawa entertainment scandal. And he uses a very specific loaded slang term for this agency, Kawaramo Daimyoke.
Kawaramo Daimyoke. The cultural weight there is really heavy.
Right. Break that down for us.
So historically, Kawarama refers to people of the riverbanks. It was a marginalized class in feudal Japan, often associated with actors and entertainers. And daimyoke refers to the ruling family of a feudal lord.
Right, so by mashing those together, he's delivering this savage critique. He's saying this powerful entertainment agency operates like an insulated rural family dynasty.
Yeah, like they're fundamentally just entertainers, but society gave them so much unchecked influence that they strut around with the impunity of feudal lords.
Exactly. So when the scandal finally broke and Noriyuki Higashiyama issued a public apology, Moku-Gyuu completely dismissed it. He just saw a former actor reading lines from a script.
Which forces us to ask, who is that apology actually for?
Right, if it's all a narrative world.
Exactly. Moku-Gyuu argues it wasn't genuine contrition for the victims or society. It was purely an alibi, a theatrical performance just to appease corporate sponsors and shareholders so their financial structures could survive.
Just another skeleton handed to the public.
Precisely.
And his rage isn't just for private agencies. He turns that same fury toward Japan's national broadcaster, NHK. He calls them INOHK.
Inu meaning dog, right.
Dog, yeah. He views them not as journalists, but as an obedient lapdog for the establishment.
Oh.
He points to this specific incident on the program Newswatch 9, where they allegedly aired a fabricated segment without even getting consent from a bereaved family.
And for him, using a grieving family to fabricate a narrative isn't just an ethical breach, it's the ultimate enforcement of the narrative world.
He actually demands the entire organization be dissolved over it.
He does. But I'm struggling with a bit of a logical leap here.
What's that?
Well, if Moku-Gyuu says these entertainment agencies and broadcasters are acting like untouchable feudal lords, doesn't that inherently imply the Japanese public is actively choosing to be obedient peasants?
Oof. Yeah, and that is the uncomfortable core of his thesis. He argues the public is entirely complicit.
Wow.
Yeah, he says the root cause of the Johnny Kitagawa scandal and the media cover-ups is this deeply entrenched culture of closed-room power harassment. But Japanese society refuses to face it.
Because confronting the daimyo, the feudal lord, would disrupt the social harmony they rely on.
Exactly. It's vastly easier to stay quiet in the narrative world than to dismantle a corrupt power structure. Plus, he makes this fascinating geopolitical connection. He points out that Johnny Kitagawa was American-born.
Right.
To Moku-Gyuu, this isn't just an isolated Japanese problem. The rot is global, the corruption is interconnected, and the human urge to look the other way is universal.
So if society is universally complicit like this, we have to scale down. We have to look at the individuals running these systems. What drives a leader to protect a narrative world?
And this is where he shifts from institutional structures to literal neurological structures. He analyzes all this through his own self-identified ASD, autism spectrum disorder, and ADHD.
Right. He stops looking at institutions and starts examining the biological bugs in the human brain that create them.
Yeah. He applies this clinical lens to a prominent Japanese minister he calls Block Taro.
Block Taro, he earned that nickname because he instantly blocks critics on social media, right?
Yeah, anyone who dissents. Moku-Gyuu doesn't just see a thin-skinned politician. He clinically diagnoses this as arrogant type Asperger's.
He deconstructs why the minister hits the block button. He says it's a highly specific neurological profile, a rigid, binary, black and white worldview.
You're either a compliant friend or an absolute enemy.
Right, no gray area. He argues this stems from a profound lack of empathy and a sudden panic response when an internal narrative is challenged. And Moku-Gyuu claims he can spot these exact traits because of his own intimate understanding of neurodivergence.
It's such a fascinating paradox. Using his own neurological bugs to identify the bugs steering people in power, and he scales this up to his concept of the deep state.
Now, when people hear deep state, they think of shadowy, magical cabals.
Right, but he removes all the mysticism. He lays out this logical 7-part taxonomy of how systemic control actually operates.
It's a purely pragmatic breakdown. He defines it as a machine. You have corrupt bureaucrats protecting their departmental interests.
Psychopathic politicians who lack the biological capacity for empathy.
Compromised media conglomerates acting as PR arms instead of watchdogs.
Educational institutions shifting cultural baselines over generations.
And global organizations like the WEF, the World Economic Forum, where insulated elites try to impose top-down frameworks.
When you stack all those components together, they naturally form a barrier against the truth. But here is the deeply frustrating reality for him. The absolute second he utters the phrase deep state, communication collapses.
People instantly label him a taioka.
Right. Japanese slang for atama ga okashi, which basically means crazy in the head.
The mechanism of rejection happens instantly. The public hears a trigger word, slaps the ataoka label on him to invalidate his intellect, and completely refuses to engage with his logic.
Which is just a brilliant irony. The public shuts down to protect their comfort, and by doing so, everyday citizens treat Moku-Gyuu exactly the same way Block Taro treats his political critics.
Yes. This perfectly crystallizes his foundational philosophy. There is no perfectly finished human brain.
Right.
Every single human operates with structural bugs. The public has cognitive dissonance bugs, politicians have empathy bugs, and Moku-Gyuu has his ASD and ADHD bugs. Society is just a chaotic collision of defective brains steering civilization toward a cliff.
So, if human logic is that fragile, how does a society maintain any order? To prove how dangerous these bugs really are, Moku-Gyuu takes a really jarring turn in his writing. He turns the analytical lens entirely on himself.
He shares a deeply uncomfortable story from his childhood, and he explicitly labels this section as yakukuso.
Meaning reckless or desperate.
Right, it's a radical shift in tone, but we have to look at the mechanical purpose of it. He's deliberately using raw vulnerability to explain why we absolutely need invisible boundaries in human behavior.
He takes the reader back to his 3rd grade summer vacation.
Carl?
He's staying at a traditional rural house with a doma bath, a bathing area with a dirt floor. And he vividly, like clinically vividly, describes a moment where he saw his 14-year-old cousin walking around completely naked.
And he notes that she looked exactly like a younger replica of his own mother.
Yes. He refuses to sanitize the biological reality of this. He details his physical reaction as a young boy, but more importantly, he meticulously breaks down the overwhelming psychological fallout that followed immediately after.
He describes this crushing, suffocating sense of
Haitokukan, a profound, immoral feeling of deep shame.
Yeah. Even as a child, his instinctual brain recognized a fundamental line had been crossed, and that it was inherently wrong. If you are hearing this and feeling visceral discomfort, that is exactly his intention.
He wants you to feel that friction.
He's using his own deeply embarrassing shame to build a fierce political argument about human fragility. He theorizes that human beings are fundamentally fragile animals. We can incredibly easily cross invisible moral boundaries when we're suddenly exposed to stimuli we were never meant to see.
Right. He views that childhood moment of sexual awakening not as some coming-of-age memory, but as a terrifying realization of how razor-thin the line is between a functioning citizen and someone who commits a heinous crime.
It is the ultimate rejection of the narrative world.
Totally. The narrative world tells us humans are rational, we control our impulses easily. But Moku-Gyuu uses his own dark psychology to scream that human nature is messy, unpredictable, and inherently dangerous.
And he takes this fear of irreversible awakening and applies it directly to modern social debates.
Yes. Specifically, he uses this framework to explain his intense opposition to allowing transgender individuals who haven't undergone physical medical transition into public baths.
And again, we are just examining the architecture of his logic here, regardless of where one stands on the political conclusion.
Right, we're just reporting his view.
Moku-Gyuu believes that because the human brain is so deeply buggy and prone to irreversible awakenings, we cannot rely on human nature to self-regulate.
So laws can't be flexible.
Exactly. They have to act as rigid, hard boundaries to protect us from our own fragile psychology.
In his mind, if society removed the hard physical boundaries, the internal mental boundaries that keep civilization functioning will inevitably collapse right alongside them.
Which brings us to the sum of who Quiet Beef really is. He is a deeply complex, polarizing figure, cynical, driven by his neurodivergence, fiercely political.
And profoundly exhausted by a global society that refuses to look at reality.
Yeah.
He's that exhausted fisherman on the dock screaming about the sharks that ate the truth while everyone else just claps for the clean skeleton.
Right, and he navigates all this guided by one central philosophy. He essentially signs off his writing with the enduring motto, "The unexamined life is not worth living."
He demands relentless examination. The government's motives, the media's complicity, the arrogance of leaders, and, like he showed with his own childhood story, the dark, buggy corners of our own minds.
But navigating this intense framework leaves you, the listener, with a final provocative question to consider today.
Yeah. Moku-Gyuu is absolutely certain that the masses are blindly trapped inside a fabricated narrative world, rejecting truth to avoid pain. He sees this everywhere.
But if, as he so firmly believes, every single human brain is fundamentally flawed, deeply fragile, and full of neurological bugs,
how can any of us, including Moku-Gyuu or even you listening right now, be entirely sure that we aren't just living in a narrative world of our own making?
If you enjoyed this, smash the like button, give this video some hype to help it reach more people, and hit subscribe so you never miss an upload. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next video.